Welcome to the Multifamily Investor Nation podcast. I'm excited that you're here. I'm excited to be here, and as well as my special guest, David Toupin with Obsidian Capital. David, welcome to the podcast.
What's up, man? Thanks for having me, Dan.
Well, I'm looking forward to diving into this asset that you acquired recently called the West Oaks, Southfield, Michigan, 96 units. You house hacked that one. So I know it's going to be kind of some interesting tidbits of information that we're going to learn through this. But first off, before we dive into this acquisition, why don't you talk to us a little bit about yourself and your background and where you are right now as far as the multifamily side of things is concerned?
Yeah. So my name is David Toupin. I am 25 years old. I started investing in college when I was 19, 20. And I've been an entrepreneur my whole life since I was 13. I started a landscaping company. And from there, I've always had that entrepreneurial spirit. And so like a lot of people, I read Rich Dad, Poor Dad. And fortunately, I read that when I was in college, got into some really cool podcasts, and I got hooked on real estate. And fortunately, I got hooked on multifamily, which was really what I wanted to do. So, end of college, last 2 years, I started looking for deals to buy. I started with a 12-unit property. I had no money, raised capital from some investors, syndicated it. This is before syndication was really a big buzzword like it is nowadays. But, got into that and then just kept rinse and repeat, did it over and over again. I've bought just under 1,000 apartments at this point in the past 4.5 years. And I own a software company, which is also multifamily focused on the underwriting side of things. So it's an automated underwriting tool online called Real Estate Lab. It's actually launching right around when we're taking this, putting this podcast, so, Q1, Q2 of 2021. And so that's what I do. I buy apartments, I build apartments, and I have a software company for apartments.
Well, it's really exciting, and I know the listeners probably are listening to that going, wow, he's only 25. What is he going to do for the next 25 years, right? It's kind of exciting to see a lot of the energy that a lot of the younger people have, and it's good to have you on. And let's go ahead and dive into this acquisition that you had called West Oaks out of Southfield, Michigan, 96 units. You house hacked it. But let's first dive into, how did you find this deal? How did you source it?
Yeah, I sourced it. I came from kind of the family side of things first started. And so a lot of people in single owners to owners. And that's what I did. I sent a letter to this guy that owned over $1 billion in property. He was a big time owner locally there in Michigan, and probably had no business returning my call from that mailer. But he did. He answered it. He called me. He said, "Hey, I have an asset. It's my oldest, smallest property. Looking to sell it. It's not in the best condition, but if you're interested, why don't you go drive by and make me an offer?" And I drove, and well, it was a lot nicer than the stuff I had previously bought. So I guess maybe to him it wasn't that nice, but to me it was a gold mine. And so I made him an offer, and a couple of weeks later, this is in 2017, a couple of weeks later, we ended up putting it under contract.
And how soon after actually knowing that this property was available, did you actually tour the property? Because obviously you drove by it and kind of got to get the feel of it, but did you actually get to tour it at that point as well?
Oh yeah. I was like the next day I was in it. Maybe I think same day when he called me back about the letter, I went and drove around it because it was only about 20, 25 minutes from where I lived. I went and drove it, and then he had his nephew was actually the one that was managing the property. And so he had me meet up with his nephew sometime that week, and he actually took me through a couple of the units, showed me apartments. I met the onsite management team, and I got to actually get a look on the inside of the property as well.
That's pretty neat. So what was the actual purchase price on this one?
We paid about 4.2 million for the property. I think he wanted 4.8, 4.7, and we came in at like 9 first, and we ended up negotiating it down and getting him to close to like 4.3, 4.2.
Okay. And did you end up putting any earnest money down on this one?
I had a partner who helped sign on the loan, and he owned some apartments locally. And so we put down, I think we had 100,000 total. 50,000 up front and 50,000 after 30 days. The first 50,000 was still refundable for the first 30-day due diligence period. So he put up that earnest money, and then we were able to kind of go to town and start doing our due diligence over the first 30 days there.
Okay. All right. And did you end up the original offer that you put on the property? Is that what you ended up purchasing it for? Or was there any type of price renegotiations or anything like that as you got into due diligence?
No, thinking back, I don't think we negotiated at all. I think he might have given us a credit for a foundation issue we found, but it's minor. It wasn't like a lot, under 25,000 or something. Okay. But overall, yeah, we were pretty much right around the 4.2 price that we originally struck.
And how long did the seller own the property before you started looking at it?
He actually built it 40 years ago from when I think it was built in 79. And so when did I buy it? 2017. So he owned it for almost 40 years. He built it. He was the original owner. He owned it free and clear. He had paid it off. And he was kind of like, it's time to sell it, and 1031 up to something bigger.
Mm-hmm. What were the average effective rents on the property when you took it over?
The one bedrooms were at anywhere from $650 to $725. Mm-hmm. And the one bedrooms were 800 square feet, and the two bedrooms that were 1,000 square feet, 2-bed, 1-baths, they were renting anywhere from 800 to maybe 900 at the.
Okay. And you mentioned house hacking this. So when you first saw this, did you look at it and go, this is a great house hack, or was there a reason why you decided to house hack it?
No, it wasn't intended to be a house hack, but I did self-manage it. And so somehow I convinced Freddie Mac to let me self-manage it. They're probably crazy but at the same time, it worked out really well. I didn't live that far from there. I had an on-site manager and maintenance person, full-time staff. So, I actually ended up having to get out the original staff that I thought were doing well. They really weren't. Various things had happened. And so a couple months in, I had fired them to rehire some new staff. And then a unit came up, and I'm like, man, this would be a really cool experience to live on site and manage the property. Just be really hands-on, focus on it. I mean, it was by far my biggest acquisition to date. I'd raised a lot of money from investors. I was like, man, I really want to just be on site and take care of this. And so it wasn't too bad of an area either. It was like a B- area. So, I decided to move that 2 bedrooms. I tricked it out. I did a really nice renovation, and I paid the highest rent at the property too, because it really helped when I split. I got to show them what could do a unit and what type of rent that they could get in the market for that. So I moving on site for about 1.5 years.
So when you first took over this property, what was the plan for the property for doing the renovations as far as interior, exterior, and then what were you looking to push the rents to? Yeah.
So of the 6 buildings, they had already replaced 3 of the roofs. So I spent about $70,000 replacing the other roofs. So it was like 22 a roof. We spent about $30,000 doing some fixes to the parking lot, restriping it. We fixed all the carports up that were in bad shape. Fixed a lot of the balconies that were sagging. And then we did new siding. We spent about $150,000 on new vinyl siding around the whole building, covered up the old T111 wood siding that was rotting. And so from all that, it kind of made it look a lot nicer. We redid all the common areas. It was one of these old buildings where you walk in and they've got the hallways, and then you access all the units from hallways. And so first floor, second floor. So we redid all those new. I cleaned up the overall appearance and made it give it kind of a refreshing look, new sign out front. And then we raised some capital to go in and renovate units as well. So the plan was to spend 5,000 to 6,000 units. So, units. So we had about $200,000 set aside for renovating apartments. And going in, when I first got the rents in this area, we were like, okay, let's get $100 increase. And we were going to bring the 1s from $650 up to $750 and the 2s from $750 to $850. Well, what ended up happening is over the course of the next year, this area had improved a lot. And rents had gone up significantly. So we ended up actually getting the ones renovated for spending about $6,000. We got them from 650 up to 900. And the 2 bedrooms, I took many of those from that 750, 800 mark up to 1,000, 1,100, and a couple we even got 1,150 on those. And so we were able to bump the rents, $200, $300, sometimes $400 on these.
Wow, that's great. That's awesome.
Yeah.
And what was the occupancy when you first took it over?
I think it was like 100%. It was 99%. They had low rents and high occupancy for sure.
Yeah, which is always a good thing to see because there's definitely some opportunity there to, push the rents and improve the community at the same time.
Totally. Yeah. You could just tell that it needed some better management.
Yeah. So you bought this in 2017 and you held on to it for a year and a half, you said?
Yeah. I had it for like 20 months at the time we sold it. It was under 2 years, just under 2 years.
Okay. And so when you're on site and you're living on site, obviously there's a property management fee that you would have been paying to somebody else, but because you did it via syndication, you are now being paid that property management fee to be able to be on site and self-managing, correct?
Yep. Correct. Yep.
Yes. Okay.
So I paid myself like 4% of the income that included an asset management fee and a property management fee. Then I pretty much just used that to pay for my rent and living costs while I was there.
Yeah. No, that's actually a very smart idea. And you also got to learn with boots on the ground and real world experience on what it's like to be a property manager, right?
Yeah. Oh man, I tell you, it was exciting and interesting, but I probably wouldn't do it again. I had residents coming in the middle. Yeah. I tried not to tell anyone that I was the owner, by the way. I was like, I'm the manager, I'm the regional manager, not the owner. But some people somehow figured out, and people talk, and so I had people coming up to my unit like 11, 12 at night, sometimes knocking on my door, being like, "You need to give me time to pay rent." And I'm like, "I'm not the owner. You can't talk to me." It was funny. So, it was a great learning experience. And my managing employees, hiring, firing, I had an on-site manager quit on me at like 6 a.m. one day before she was supposed to come in, and we had just finished renovating like 5 or 6 units. I had like 7 vacants or 8 vacants, and she quit. And I'm like, oh my gosh, what am I going to do? So I end up having to go into the office. Now I'm sitting in the office for the next 3 months, putting the rest of my business on pause so I could be the on-site manager, and I'm leasing units and putting the bills in and managing the software and updating it all. And, it's a good experience.
Wow, man. I'm sure you got a lot more stories in between all that as well.
Oh man, I could tell you a couple. Yeah, there's some funny stuff. So
let's talk about the due diligence on this one. I know we kind of jumped ahead a little bit and talked about some of the renovations and the business plan, but was there anything during the due diligence process on this acquisition that might be interesting for us to talk about?
Yeah, I would say the biggest thing that I learned, especially what was nice, was I was direct to seller on this. But what I learned from this was that being transparent in business is always the best way to operate, and just operating with a sense of integrity. There were several issues that would come up along the way, and I know there's always this game between buyers and sellers where it's like, hey, it's the buyer versus the seller, right? There's always issues, and there's always things going back and forth. I mean, after doing 10, 12 transactions now, I've seen it on most transactions, and I really try not to operate this way. But a lot of times you get stuck with a tough seller, a tough buyer. But, whenever an issue came up here, I was really transparent with the seller. And so I actually took 5 months to close this because 30-day due diligence comes up. I thought I would have the money raised. I had like 1.1 or 1.2 million of the 1.7 raise that we needed. And I had a guy that said he was in for 500,000. And, this guy acted like a big shot, acted like he had all the money in the world. And he told me, he was like, oh, I'm good for 500K. I'm good for 500K. And as you probably know, Dan, right? A lot of the times people will say they're interested in investing, but they never end up coming through. And so this guy did that, and he pulled out last minute. And I talked to the seller, and I'm like, hey man, I'm just going to be honest with you. I had this money lined up. Somebody backed out. I'm working on finding some replacements, but would you work with me on some extra time? And he wasn't in a huge rush. And so I think he appreciated that I was just super honest with him. He was kind of throwing me a bone. but he worked with me. And so I just continued to be that way. Like, hey, this came up or that happened or something with the lender. There's a little delay. Like, hey, could we work this out? I'm willing to pay you a little extra earnest money to extend, et cetera, et cetera. And it just avoided having problems. I was talking to him once, twice a week, letting him know everything that I was doing, so that if there was never came up, we had a good enough rapport relationship to work through it. So I think that's hugely important when you're in due diligence.
So when you were, we already talked a little bit about the investor side of things, and one of the things you did mention was about the large investor that backed out, and honestly, it's usually the ones that you remember are the ones that say, "Oh, I can bring 500,000," and they end up not following through. I've had that happen multiple times where they've said, "Oh, I'll bring in 500," or I'll bring in 200 or 300 or whatever, and they wait and they wait and they wait and they wait. Thankfully, most of ours, pretty much all of ours, always have backups. So you can go on to them, but it's like you want to reserve for that person if they want it, but then you're like, at the end of the day, if you don't come through, I don't want to be stuck, the day before closing trying to scramble to find this last, $500,000. So one of the things that we did earlier on, and I think you probably do this now with your group, is we set a closing deadline or a funding deadline. It's usually about 3 to 4 weeks before closing. And that way, if we have some investors that are like, hey, I can't fund, then we have plenty of time to kind of backfill that to be able to get those investors in before that time period comes up. But it was great that you had a seller that was, amenable to be able to extend and not be a factor for them and things like that. So that was great.
Yeah, no, you're right, man. I mean, you've got to have some sort of a deadline, and it can't be a week before closing. Otherwise you're getting stuck with your pants down a lot of times. Right. So you really need to do, like, if you're doing a 60-day timeline, capital's due within first 40 days, 35 to 40 days. And then it gives you a little bit of time to get the rest in if you need to.
So let's talk about raising capital on this one, because obviously, we talked about that just a little bit, but how did you end up raising capital for this one? Because this was obviously, or maybe it's not obvious, but this was your first syndication where you raised money on, wasn't it?
This is my first big one. I did 2 units before where I raised 2,000. So going from that, raising 1.7 million is still to date the hardest thing I ever had to do in business, and it was extremely difficult. It was like pulling times 10. I was 21. I had only bought 24 units before. I wasn't known money in the deal because I didn't have money to put in the deal. So it wasn't like I could say, hey, I have skin in the game. And so it was really difficult to raise money from investors. I really, I'm a very analytical person. And, I think what helped in the end was I learned along the way, like, you can't hard sell investors a lot of times on an investment. Like, a lot of times when you try and hard sell people, it pushes them away even more. Right. And so it just ended up being like a numbers game. I think I went to a couple hundred people and I ended up getting 26 people to say yes. And this was the first deal. I included a couple relatives, and they put $50,000. A couple people threw $50,000 to like an IRA, and then I had just asked for tons of referrals. Like, anyone I talked to is like, hey, if you're not interested, do you know anyone that might be interested? I got into a good group with some doctors, and then fortunately, my partner who signed on the loan for this deal ended up putting in 100,000 himself, and then he brought 5 or 6 of his friends. And so me and him split the GP for doing that. And then for him signing on the loan. So I think I only had at closing like 1.3 of the 1.7. So I didn't even have it all at closing, but I had enough to close and to start renovations. And so it took me like 6-7 months to raise that almost $2 million. Mm-hmm. It was a while.
Well, I will tell you and second that one of our very first raises that we did that was about $2.5 million was the hardest one we'd ever done.
Yeah, it's not easy, man.
Thankfully, though, as you kind of build up and you build that investor database and you build your credibility with investors, you get to have it becomes easier, right? To be able to raise funds. And we just closed a deal last year in the fall. And we did an analysis to figure out how many of those investors were repeat investors, right? And we found out that like 62%, a little over 62% of those investors were repeat investors. So when you start to prove yourself and you have those repeat investors, that's what really kind of allows you to be able to raise money faster, because you have those people that are, kind of coming back in, but then you also have those people that are telling other people about you too. And I think that's probably one of the biggest lessons that people can listen to right now is you didn't stop. You talked to over 100 people, but you when you talk to those people that weren't interested, it's, hey, maybe right now it's not the right time for you, but do you know of anybody that might be interested in putting money into this deal? Because people who have money are usually hanging out with people that have money, right? Or at least they know where those other people are.
They always say know somebody. Yep.
Exactly. Right. So we usually try to hang around people that we know and like, right? So those are
I like that you said that, because I think that's true. Like 60%, 50-60% on every one of our deals is a repeat investor. Another 20 to 25% is a referral. And then the rest are new people that we had met, maybe not right during that deal, but prior to starting that deal, and we'd been building a relationship with. So it is a ton of repeat investors. And, fortunately nowadays, after 4 years of doing this, raised a little over 25 million. We've got people that are like, hey, just shoot me a text every time you get a deal and I'm in, count me in for 100K on every deal you do going forward, type of thing. And so we've got a good loyal base of those type of people. And then, now have a couple larger investors, groups of people that'll put in 500K to, 2 million on a deal. So, but it comes with time, right? It took years, several years to get that. And a lot of hard work. And, luckily we performed really well on this deal and we're able to keep a lot of those investors going forward.
So how was it kind of going back to you living on the property now, kind of house hacking this one? What was it like to try to find local vendors and contractors and things like that to be able to do some of the renovations on the property?
Well, it was great because I GC'd that. We did about $500,000 total in renovations, and I GC'd the whole thing. And so it was nice because I was right there. I could meet people. I had other friends that were investors locally. And so I, was asking for like, hey, you have a good roof contractor or an asphalt guy. And so I can meet the people on site myself. I could kind of get a chance to judge their character, see if they're people I wanted to work with. And so going through that process was cool because I picked a lot of really good contractors. And then I also picked a couple of bad ones. And I learned from that and really started to figure out, what is it like GCing a renovation? What are common things that go wrong? You need to have good contracts when you're spending $20,000, $30,000, $40,000 on a single project or more. Like you really definitely need to have everything in writing. Picking contractors that are not strapped for cash so that they're asking for more money because, you didn't give them a big enough deposit to finish the job or stuff like that. Right. And there's just all these little things that you end up figuring out along the way that are really important. But I think the biggest thing that I'm glad I did that is because I learned what a lot of the pricing is like for renovations now. Like I could tell you line by line what it costs to replace a countertop with granite versus Formica if you want to replace the cabinets or reface the cabinets and paint them with just new doors, a new vanity, vinyl flooring versus two-tone paint versus one tone, like all these things. I learned the pricing on all these. So now going forward, as I price out renovations that we want to do on future projects, I know the costs, which is awesome. And so being hands-on with all that and GCing those renovations really allowed me to I got to learn hands-on what all these things cost.
Now, because you did that, were you also able to get an additional fee for like a construction management fee or something like that, since you were doing some of these renovations and managing that yourself?
I didn't. Looking back, there's all these things that, we do now that I probably could have and should have done. But no, I just, on that deal, I only had an acquisition fee and an asset management fee and then property management fee.
Okay. And what was the value increase? And because obviously this one's gone full cycle at this point. So what was the full value increase that you had from when you bought it to when you actually sold it?
Yeah, we sold it for just under 7 million. So what is that? 2.8 million increase. We were all in at 5. So we had like a little, we overall, not including like how the profits were split up, we doubled the original capital put into the deal.
Wow.
In under 2 years. Yeah. So I think, with my split taken out and everything, investors had like a 1.7 multiple on their money.
That's pretty
under
nice.
2
That's
years.
pretty significant.
Yeah. Yeah. We killed it for him.
And everything like that.
Yeah.
Too.
We killed it. Yeah. Yeah. It was good. I didn't do a cost segregation study. I didn't know what that was. So I didn't have that. I should have had that done, but, I didn't even know when I went under contract on this deal. I didn't even know what Freddie Mac was. I started looking up local banks, and then I was like, I was Googling what's the best loan for apartments, and I came across this company that it was Hunt. You know, me at the time I didn't know what Hunt was. They're a massive mortgage broker and DUS lender, and so I got a Freddie Mac loan from them, and I was like, wow, this is a great loan. I had no clue what it was until after I went under contract on the deal. So it was one of those things, man, where I really didn't know what I was doing going into it, but it worked out well.
That's awesome. So is there anything else that you can think of that might be interesting for us to talk about or touch on that maybe you might think would be interesting for the listeners to hear about on this deal?
Yeah, I think it's really important. You're doing your first deal or first couple deals. Like if you can have one of those, if not your first deal, but then first couple be in your backyard where you can be really hands-on. I self-managed for 220 apartments, and I was very hands-on. I was on site a lot. Obviously I lived on site for this one. I really, I can tell investors now that I know how apartments are operated. I don't just see it from far away. I've lived it. I've been on site. I've actually been the on-site manager of leased units. So, I know how those systems work, and it's really helped me understand, how a lot of the processes behind the scenes work, how renovations are priced, and being very hands-on from start to finish with the attorneys and transactional process, as I was kind of muddling my way through all that on my own. So, it's good to be hands-on. If you can get in and do a deal with as few GP partners as possible, take the lead and structure that deal, and be as hands-on, do as much of that work as you can. It's a little harder than if you do it with a big team, but at the same time, you're going to get a bigger piece of the pie and you're going to learn a lot more at the end.
One question I was just thinking about as you were talking about this is whenever you're hiring a property manager, obviously most states and locales will require them to be licensed as a property manager. So when you took over and had to fill in for that other property manager, were you required to do that, or were you exempt because you were one of the owners?
No, I think normally that rule applies to third-party management. So if I'm going to manage other people's properties, but if you're acting as a third-party management company for your own properties, you don't have to be licensed.
Okay,
and that might be a state-by-state thing.
Yeah,
but
I think that for the most part across the board, that's pretty accurate, because I think I've done some research on that as well, where if you are the one managing your own properties, then you don't necessarily have to have that third-party licensure, but still good to have that extra bit of education, or at least have someone on the team that does.
Yeah, it definitely. Yeah. Yeah. I wouldn't suggest going into something that big with as little knowledge as I had, but this is all I was doing at the point. I didn't have another job. I was full-time doing this, and it was 24/7, me just figuring things out and pushing it forward.
So I have two final questions for you to wrap up the podcast episode here. They're contrasting questions, and I think I know how you're going to answer both of these questions from the content that I've already gotten so far. But the first question is what did you find was easier during this entire process of this acquisition that maybe originally you thought was going to be a little bit more challenging?
Easier?
He's like,
I
nothing.
would say getting no, it was not easy, man. I mean, everything we had issues on, from the loan capital raise to, I think probably, man, I would have to say qualifying for the loan, the property qualifying for the loan was I thought it would be a really big deal, but it's just kind of a process with Freddie Mac. As long as you check the boxes, you can get approved.
So the opposite of that would be, what would you say was the hardest thing that you did on this process, and the process of acquiring this property that maybe originally you thought was going to be a little bit more easy?
Raising the money, man. It was raising the money. Yeah, I thought it was just going to flow in. Dude, I got a great deal. It's going to flow. It did not, and it was tough. So
yeah, I call that whenever you have to, raise that amount of money. They call that a butt pucker moment, right? I mean, you got to
Yeah,
really,
yeah.
you're freaking out. You got a lot of sleepless nights,
Yep.
but you got to get it done. You
Oh
can't
yeah.
stop.
You gotta get it done. Yep. That's a great way to describe it.
Well, David, I want to thank you so much for being here on the podcast with us. How can the listeners reach out to you if they have further questions for you about this acquisition, or maybe you want to, join your list and be part of some of your future acquisitions that you have?
Yeah. If you want to hear more about deals we're doing, go to my website. It's obsidiancapitalco.com. And if you want to get in touch with me, the best way is normally Instagram at Real Estate Jedi, or look up David Toupin. And I'm also on Facebook, LinkedIn, and other platforms. Just look up David Toupin.
Awesome. Well, David, thank you so much for spending some time this afternoon here on the podcast with us. It's been very great, very insightful, and looking forward to continuing to follow you as you continue to close more deals, and looking forward to having you back as you close more as well.
Absolutely, Dan. I appreciate you having me on, man. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you.